What if I told you that the brutal executions of female Nazi guards were just as horrifying as the crimes they committed? The truth behind their swift, unforgiving justice is darker and more chilling than you ever imagined. Welcome back to the channel, where we uncover the shocking, untold stories of history. In today's video, we'll dive into one of the darkest chapters of World War II, the post-war trials and executions of female Nazi concentration camp guards. These women, responsible for some of the most horrific atrocities of the Holocaust, faced swift retribution, but not in the way most people think. The post-war retribution against female Nazi concentration camp guards was as severe as the atrocities they had previously overseen. These women, who had played active roles in some of the Holocaust's most notorious death camps, such as Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Bergen-Belsen, were identified, arrested, and put on trial for their participation in the brutal genocide. The trials and executions that followed aimed to ensure that the women responsible for such horrors were held accountable for their actions. The punishments they faced, often carried out in the very places where their crimes had occurred, were a stark reminder of the terrible crimes of the Nazi regime. These trials were as much about justice as they were about sending a clear message. No one was exempt from accountability, regardless of gender. When we think about the horrors of World War II, the image that usually comes to mind is one of male soldiers, brutalizing civilians, committing war crimes, and carrying out heinous acts of violence. While it is true that men were primarily responsible for the majority of war crimes, there were also women who played an active role in the genocide, particularly during the Holocaust. Despite a Nazi regime that imposed many restrictions on women, such as limiting their roles in the military and other state functions, many women still became fervent supporters of Nazi ideology. Some even actively participated in the atrocities carried out by the regime, particularly in the concentration and extermination camps. While male soldiers and officers were often the face of the Nazi war machine, women who joined the SS or served as camp guards were instrumental in carrying out the systemic violence that led to the deaths of millions. The camps they oversaw were not only places of forced labor, but also centers of systematic murder. These women were often tasked with carrying out orders that involved the torture, humiliation, and execution of prisoners, and they did so with a chilling zeal. Following the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Allied forces began the daunting task of locating and bringing all those responsible for the genocide to justice. This included identifying both male and female perpetrators, many of whom had been directly involved in the operation of the death camps. The executions of female war criminals were carried out with clinical precision. The Allied forces employed hanging as the primary method of execution for these women, a stark contrast to the brutal, unchecked violence they had inflicted on their victims. Many of the accused Nazi criminals, both men and women, requested death by firing squad, a soldier's death, but these requests were always denied. The Allied forces were determined to maintain the moral high ground, ensuring that their methods of retribution did not mirror the savagery of the Nazis. While the public demanded justice, the trials were deliberately swift, efficient, and focused on ensuring that punishment was meted out in a manner that would not compromise the dignity of the Allied forces. The most famous post-war trials were the Nuremberg trials, held in late 1945 and early 1946. These trials sought to bring the most prominent members of the Nazi regime to justice, including figures like Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, Luftwaffe head Hermann Göring, and propagandist Julius Streicher. While the Nuremberg trials were dominated by male defendants, one woman, Hertha Oberhäuser, was also tried. Oberhäuser, a physician who had conducted horrific medical experiments on prisoners, received a relatively light sentence, only serving a short prison term. However, for female perpetrators involved in the concentration camps, the trials were often more directly focused on their actions within the camps themselves. The most notorious female perpetrators were tried at a series of lesser-known but equally important trials, including the Ravensbrück, Belsen, and Auschwitz trials. At these trials, a number of women, including Irma Grese, Juana Bormann, Elisabeth Volkenrath, and Herta Ehlert, faced prosecution for their roles in the concentration camp system. These women were accused of carrying out atrocities that included torture, execution, and selecting prisoners for the gas chambers. They were held accountable for the suffering they inflicted on innocent people, and their trials became a symbol of the larger effort to bring the perpetrators of the Holocaust to justice. One of the most infamous female guards was Irma Grese, who became known as the Hyena of Auschwitz. Born on October 7, 1923, Grese came from a troubled family, with her mother committing suicide when she was just 13 years old. Initially aspiring to be a nurse, Grese was rejected from nursing school, which led her to join the SS in 1942 at the age of 19. She began her career at Ravensbrück before being transferred to Auschwitz, where she became infamous for her brutal and sadistic treatment of prisoners. Grace's role in the selections, where she decided which prisoners would live and which would die, cemented her place as one of the most notorious figures of the Holocaust. In 1944, Grese was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued to oversee the torment of prisoners until the camp was liberated by British forces in 1945. She was arrested shortly after liberation, tried, and executed by hanging. Juana Bormann, another of the female guards, was known for her particularly sadistic tendencies. Born on October 10, 1893, Bormann had worked in domestic service before joining the SS in 1938. Her first assignment at Auschwitz in 1942 marked the beginning of her cruel tenure in the concentration camp system. Bormann had a reputation for torturing prisoners, often using her trained German Shepherd to attack them. Her sadistic pleasure in the suffering of others was evident to those who survived the camp. Bormann was later transferred to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued her brutal practices until her arrest. Like Grese, Bormann was tried at the Belsen trials and was sentenced to death by hanging. Elisabeth Volkenrath was another infamous female supervisor at Auschwitz. Born on September 5, 1919, Volkenrath was initially trained as a hairdresser before joining the SS in 1941. She rose through the ranks quickly, becoming one of the senior female guards at Auschwitz, where she was responsible for overseeing prisoners, particularly the women. Volkenrath's cruelty was well documented, and she was known for her direct involvement in the selections, as well as for her role in the death marches that took place as the Allies advanced. She was eventually transferred to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued to carry out the same brutal tactics. Following her arrest, Volkenrath was tried and sentenced to death. Herta Ehlert, born on March 26, 1905 in Berlin, was less notorious than some of the other women, but nonetheless played a significant role in the Nazi concentration camp system. Initially a housekeeper, Ehlert joined the SS in 1939. She was stationed at several camps, including Ravensbrück and Auschwitz, where she enforced the harsh regulations and contributed to the systematic cruelty of the regime. While her actions were less overtly sadistic than those of Grace Bormann or Volkenrath, her participation in the Nazi system of oppression was undeniable. Ehlert was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in the atrocities. These 4 women were arrested by British forces after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, and they were among the 45 individuals tried during the Belsen trials in 1945. The women all pleaded that they were simply following orders, a defense that was common in many trials of Nazi war criminals. However, this defense was rejected in each case, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. Eyewitnesses and survivors testified to their direct involvement in the selection of prisoners for the gas chambers and their roles in the physical and psychological abuse that occurred in the camps. The trials resulted in the execution of 3 of the women by hanging, while Ehlert received a 20-year prison sentence. The legacy of these trials is an essential part of Holocaust history. They ensured that those responsible for the suffering of millions would not go unpunished. While the brutality of the Nazi regime was widely condemned, these trials served as an important reminder that justice would be sought, no matter how long it took or who was involved. The women tried and executed after the war were not the only perpetrators of Nazi crimes, but their trials and executions were significant in holding the female perpetrators accountable. By confronting the actions of these women, the trials also underscored the universal truth that no one, regardless of gender, is exempt from the moral and legal obligations of humanity. Ultimately, the post-war trials represented a global commitment to ensuring that the atrocities of the Holocaust would not be forgotten, and that those responsible for such unspeakable horrors would be held accountable. It was a brutal but necessary step in the pursuit of justice and the healing of a world forever scarred by war. If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold historical stories. And, as always, leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. History may be dark, but it's our duty to keep the truth alive.